Good afternoon, welcome to the Caffeinated Bible. Today I want to do something a little bit different in my series on the parables. And I've got a special guest that I'm going to bring in for that. But first, we got to get ready with coffee. So while the coffee's steeping, for today I thought we'd do something kind of different. What I'd like to do is interview someone who took the parables course about 10 years ago and look at where he's gone since then. And perhaps the biggest claim to fame that he has is that he is the man who has actually met God. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the interview. So for that, we have to finish the coffee and go downstairs. So in the meantime, you can grab a cup of coffee so that you're ready for this interview as well. Okay, all set, except for I gotta get changed real fast. There, that's better. All set. Let's go. If you're new here and this is the first time you're watching the channel, this is the Caffeinated Bible. My name is David Paris. I've been teaching graduate level theological studies and doing research for the past 30 years or more. And the goal of this channel is to take a lot of that and make it available to a much wider audience on YouTube. So if you find this beneficial and you enjoy these videos, be sure to tell other people, hit the subscribe button, and then share it with others. And a thumbs up always is nice to see as well. Last week we looked at the parable of the prodigal son, and while going through that, one of the things that hit me this time was when the prodigal or the younger son is off in that foreign land. He's left his father's estate. He's taken half of his wealth. He's gone off to this foreign country and he squandered it on loose living. He's then sent into the fields as a servant to feed this person's pigs, and he's treated worse than the pigs are. And it struck me for the first time that this person really represents the illegal immigrant or the migrant worker. They're underrepresented, they don't know the culture, they don't know the people, and they may not even know the laws. And so as a result, they're ripe for exploitation in a lot of different ways. And as a result, I realized here's a point where the parable, just a small aspect of that parable, impinges and intersects with the questions that we're facing today as a culture. This brings up a lot wider questions about how does the biblical text then interact with our culture and our society today. Now, having said all that, I need to make a phone call and bring someone in on the video today who works in this whole area here. Hey, Kutter, glad to see you. So, I'm making my weekly video for YouTube, and I was wondering if I could interview you about parables, film, culture, and theology.
Absolutely. It just so happens that you found me quarantined in my home where I have nothing else to do but talk about this very thing.
When you were here in Colorado, you took my course on the parables, and I was wondering what your takeaway, the lasting impression or thoughts from that course might be.
Well, a lot's transpired since then. I did a PhD in Theology and Culture, focused on music and film. So I've expanded from sort of music and film to film more generally to audiovisual storytelling, if you will.
Now, have you written something that the average person could read?
You know this as well as others. When you get a PhD, your mind gets sort of perverted, and you think you're speaking in very accessible ways, and then all you need is your wife. Or I used to have a wonderful guy. His name's Josh, and he would sit in the very front row every time I preached, and he would just give me one of these. Anytime I used a word that nobody knew.
Have you written something that's published out there that people would be interested in?
Yes, I hope so. Uh, yeah, yeah. I try to write for everybody. The most recent thing on film is called Deep Focus, and actually I co-authored it with my PhD mentor Robert Johnston. It really is a kind of deep dive both into kind of the history of film, why Christians would or should care about it, and then some basic tools that you can use for reading, understanding, and interpreting film, and what it means to engage film as a person of faith. Specific examples of movies that each of us find particularly helpful in that dialogue. That'd be one book I'd recommend. So that's Deep Focus. Another one is called God in the Movies. We put together, and now you can get the digital resources online as well, which you can find below. And this is, we went through the last 60 years of film history and said, with each decade, what are the top films that encourage theological conversation? And we wrote short, sort of basically conversation guides where you get a synopsis of the film, you get some key clips to talk about, some discussion questions, some biblical passages that you can get together with a group and both watch the movie and have a sort of guided conversation.
So somebody could use that website then as a resource if they wanted to discuss film and theology at their church. They could take your material and then actually watch the video and talk about it.
Absolutely. And so on the website corresponding to it, you can see we have the clips actually available. But even more, I often encourage, get together with the group, watch the movie together, and then talk about it. In COVID world, depending upon when you're watching this video, you may still be in quarantine. And you could do watch parties, right? So maybe you watch it asynchronously and get together for a conversation. Or maybe you all get together online and get your popcorn and watch the movie at the same time.
Talking about film and theology, I was wondering, what are some of the films that you found most meaningful to discuss or to look at theologically, say in the last year, or maybe you could open it up a little bit wider if you'd like?
There's always more than you can mention, and so this doesn't mean these are the only ones, but the ones that come to mind, probably the first one is Parasite. I don't know if did you see this one, Dave?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
So with any of the ones I'm about to say, they come with a viewer warning. I do want to say that. What's fascinating about it to me is that it won the Oscar this last year, and it was the first in the Oscar category is foreign language film. And just the fact that that is the case says a lot. And what I find interesting about this film is not that it's explicitly theological really in any way, but it does raise a lot of questions, even back to what we were saying earlier about parables, about the different sort of classes in a society and how globalization and wealth and economics and sort of class distinctions are all bound up and kind of thrown into this blender, especially in a highly dense urban population. The other ones, though, that are more, I would say, explicitly theological, and it's just very clear. One, an excellent film that just got released on Amazon. It didn't hit any of the theaters. It was at Sundance. It got distribution and it fell through. Is a film called Burden. And it is really, again, an R-rated film for very important reasons, but it's based on a real-life story of an African-American pastor in a small town in the South where the local chapter of the KKK puts up a KKK museum and gift shop in the center of town. And it is a really compelling story about I would say a sort of radical commitment to loving one's enemy. It's based on a true story that happened in the 90s, the 1990s, not the 1890s, and is really, I think, a challenging film for all sorts of reasons. And the main one is that it's based upon an actual Christian man who, as a pastor, did something that was incredibly risky for the sake of the gospel, and for today in terms of the way that we are encountering issues of race and society and church being all bound up with each other. That one, I think, is one that stands out in my mind as almost required viewing. I would put it in that category. But again, it gets its R rating, so it's not required viewing for the whole family. It is for adults, but especially if you're an adult who's interested, Burden is a great film. Yeah. Okay.
One of the questions I was having for you is that I know a lot of times at church people will go see a film, and then they come back, and then during coffee hour at church they'll talk about, I remember when the movie The Joker came out, and a number of people were talking about that.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there was a framework that you could easily summarize that might help Christians when they see a movie on their own, instead of doing like a discussion group or something like that, to think through the interaction between their faith and that film.
Yeah, that's good. I couch it in terms of what would be called thematic criticism, right? And that's, you go, Joker is a movie about a potentially a man who struggles with mental health issues, who runs up against a broken system, and we see the consequences of it. That's what you might detail as the plot or the narrative. But what's the movie really about? Well, really it's about what we do with all of those who fall through the gaps of society, right? And what the implications are of those, and how those come back to haunt us, et cetera. That it would be what the theme is, what the movie really is about, these sort of universal statements of the human condition. And so if you can start there by thinking through what those themes are, can you identify the losses and the longings in these characters, right? In the story. So if it's Joker or something else, what does the film show that this man or these people have lost and that they're mourning over? And what is it that they long for? And if you ask that question, a lot of times you can get at the theme in some pretty interesting ways. And then from there, the next step really is to say, or for me, is to ask the question of, then thematically, if you're reading the biblical narrative, where do you see tension and resonance? And you could ask either. Sometimes you go, oh, well, this clearly, thematically, aligns with what I understand to be similar themes that pop up, let's say, in the parables, and what Jesus is calling us to. Or you would say, man, this film, for any number of reasons, thematically is really running against the grain of what I understand to be more thematically what we see in the biblical text, or maybe my theological tradition. I don't want to say Joker is holding up something that we should see as an exemplar, but it does shed light for us on some of these societal ills in ways that I think the gospel speaks to. And so whether it's in tension or in resonance with the themes of the Bible are equally interesting. The question is, what do you make of those, and then how do you respond? So that'd be my sort of quick, 1 minute take on how do you do theological criticism. Start with thematic film elements, and then think thematically, biblically. And where those two things align or stand in tension are the two places where you might explore more of thinking, what do I make of myself, my discipleship, and what God's doing in the world in light of how those themes come together?
Great. Another thing you've been involved in down there is sort of an engagement with some of the films or producers in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so I always like to say that you're the person who has actually met and know God.
That's true. At least the voice of God, right? Or I guess he plays actual God, and yeah.
So you've met Morgan Freeman, and some others, but I was wondering how you see that interaction between what you're doing as a theologian and the sort of corporate Hollywood world or the corporate film world. Because oftentimes as Christians, I think we see ourselves as a us versus them, sort of a fortress mentality that we have to boycott, or we don't go, or we always talk against people like that. But I was wondering how you found your personal engagement with people within Hollywood and within the corporate film world.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I would not have, when I was a young man or a younger man in your parables class, and then I thought, I'll go do a PhD in theology and culture and think about film. At no point did I go, I imagine a future where I'll be sitting down with Morgan Freeman, or I'll be, Facebook friends with Paul Schrader, or something. That would not have been what I had anticipated or imagined. What's emerged, though, is a deep desire for, what I would basically just call public theology. So what I see as important in my role when it comes to film, and then as a person of faith, a Christian leader, is to actually work exactly against what you just described, right? Instead of a sort of bunker mentality or boycotting, to say, how might we build bridges, missional bridges into worlds that often we, as the people of God, misunderstand, and reverse is true as well, that sort of tribe, let's say you call them, misunderstand us. And Hollywood, if you will, the production companies, they really do not understand Christians, and I don't blame them, because I don't always understand Christians. But they really, they want to know what people of faith think about and talk about and care about. They also are very open to conversations about faith and spirituality. Amazingly so at times. Some of the people that I'll run into are at this Sundance Film Festival, where we do teach a course for Fuller. And I'm shocked. I will say these sort of things, and then I'm reminded once again when I go there how willing anybody, not just the filmmakers, but the film goers who are there for no other reason than to watch movies, how open they are to conversations about faith and spirituality. And so part of what I see as my role there is basically being a sort of missional ambassador, where I want them to walk away, whether it's Morgan Freeman, Martin Scorsese was another person like this who, his history with film and Christians is not a good one. He directed, The Last Temptation of Christ, and I remember as a young person, everyone was boycotting that, and it was anathema to all good Christians, right? That, how dare you? Even when Martin Scorsese now makes his new movie, Silence, which is just a couple years old, you see this man has a spiritual journey himself, the filmmaker. And you see one of those outcomes being now another adaptation of a novel about Christian missionaries. And it's a profound reflection on faith again. In any case, you have Scorsese making this movie that is, again, another reflection on Christianity, could potentially be boycotted, if you will. And when I have him there for us to talk about his movie, I see it as my obligation as a person of faith to be a host, right? To be hospitable in the deepest Christian sense of the term. And what I wanted him walking away from that encounter, and similar to Morgan Freeman, was I may not, change your mind about Jesus. You may not come to some, saving faith. But I can be a person who, between you and I, represents Christianity that isn't immediately going to boycott your film, isn't going to, especially boycott it without having seen it, right? We're not here to create enemies, but instead generate some sort of relational capital that allows for there to be a next time.
Will you join me in welcoming the co-writer and director of the film we just watched, Silence, Martin Scorsese? Is there any difference between screening a film for a larger audience, a regular audience, and being back and maybe hearkening back to your days as a 19-year-old in seminary, thinking about going into the priesthood? What's it like to screen a film and talk to a group of seminarians?
It's somehow very different, I think, because how should I put it? I'd hoped that this would reach you in that sense, and I'd hope that it's something that you would be open to. But
and that really has been my. I hadn't anticipated it going into this, but has increasingly been where I found myself of saying, how might I be a bridge builder between an industry that often is seen as godless and my community of faith, the people of God in the world.
Well, I appreciate this very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time, and
thank you. And thank you for 15, 17-ish years ago, teaching a class on parables. So I'm happy to continue talking about it and be some of the fruits of your efforts and your work.
well, thank you. That's very encouraging. So I will let you go now. I hope you enjoyed this video and the interaction with Kutter Callaway, who teaches on Fuller Theological Seminary's main campus in the area of film and theology. I will put the links to the different books and discussions I had right underneath this video, so it's in the Show More section underneath here, and it'll have live links directly to his resources. So as you're studying the biblical text and you're moving forward in your own growth as a theologian, wherever you are in the world and whatever capacity you're in, just realize that God can do a lot more with you than you ever may think possible. Who knows the plans that has for you? It's a lot like that parable of the mustard seed. You know, it goes into the soil invisible, you will never find it again, but then it grows into something huge. I will leave you with that thought, and hopefully as an encouragement for what God can do in your life. And until next week, peace.